Today's Picmonic will be all about counterstrain of the anterior cervical tender points, illustrated by our cervical cat riding an anteater on the counter and holding a strainer and a tenderizer point. Tender points are adenomous, non-radiating, tender to the touch, and can be used to identify somatic dysfunction. The first anterior cervical tender point is AC1, along the posterior ramus of the mandible. This point is found bilaterally and targets the rectus capitis anterior muscle. This fact is represented by our cervical cat with the 1-1 and posterior ray mandible man. The tender points for AC2 through AC6 are along the bilateral anterior surfaces of the transverse processes, represented by the cervical cat in a 2-2-2 and a 6 sacs with an anteater on the surfaces of the train. These points can typically be palpated along the posterior triangle of the neck and involve the longus capitis and longus colli muscles. Next, we have AC7, the clavicle attachment to the sternocleidomastoid, represented by the cervical cat with the Lucky 7 slot machine and clavicle attached to the sternum clavicle mustard. This point can be found bilaterally, approximately 1 centimeter lateral to the sternal end of the clavicle, and targets the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Finally, we come to AC8, the sternal attachment of the sternocleidomastoid. This point is located at the suprasternal notch, just medial of the sternal end of the clavicle, at the sternal attachment of the sternocleidomastoid. This fact is represented by the cervical cat with an 8-ball and sternum attached to the sternum clavicle mustard. In review, the anterior cervical tender points are associated with somatic dysfunctions. AC1 is found bilaterally, along the posterior ramus of the mandible. AC2 through AC6 are found on the bilateral transverse processes, in the posterior triangle of the neck. AC7 is at the clavicle attachment of the sternocleidomastoid. Lastly, AC8 is found at the sternal attachment of the sternocleidomastoid. The muscles targeted include the rectus capitis of AC1, longus capitis and longus colli of AC2 through AC6, and sternocleidomastoid of AC7 through AC8.
You're probably wondering how I got myself in this situation. It's not every day you see an anteater like me being bullied by a cervical cat over a counter with a strainer and tenderizer point. It all started when an owner left his pet cat and post terrier for the day. The cat never felt as though he was number one in the owner's eyes, as the human always glowed with rays of affection every time the pup licked his mandible. So, the mischievous cat snuck out of the house with a friend, and they partied with tutus and 6 saxes. That's when I, a lonely anteater, had the misfortune of meeting him on the surface of that train.
For the rest of the story, check out Picmonic.com and sign up for a free account. There, you can also take Picmonic's quiz. The quiz automatically sets up your daily quiz by using spaced repetition algorithms based on the questions you've missed or struggled with to make sure you study what you need when you need to.
And while you're there, check out the rest of our treatment modalities Picmonics. We've got all the content you'll need to remember. Everything from muscle energy, counterstrain overview, high velocity, low amplitude thrust, or HVLA, myofascial release and soft tissue, Zinc's common compensatory pattern, and so much more, so you can lock down on everything you need to know forever.
Play, quiz, and spaced repetition. Efficient, effective, and research proven to increase exam scores.